Welcome to our deep dive into a system so many of us have, but might not fully understand. The female reproductive system. We're going to be using excerpts from the Merck manual as our guide. So, we're getting solid info. But don't worry, we'll make sure it's interesting, not just a dry medical lecture.
It's truly remarkable how the system works, impacting so much more than just the ability to have children.
Right. And get this, a baby girl is born with all the eggs she'll ever have. It makes you think about those tiny cells just waiting their turn, sometimes for decades. But before we jump ahead, let's start with the basics. Some people get confused about what's actually part of the female reproductive system.
Yeah, that's a good point. Often people mistakenly think vagina refers to everything external, but it's specifically the canal leading to the uterus. The external parts we see are actually called the vulva.
Okay, so let's break it down. We've got the labia, the folds of skin protecting things,
Yeah.
and the clitoris, which we'll talk more about later, but it's a key for pleasure. And things get more complex inside, right?
Exactly. The vagina leads to the uterus or womb where a pregnancy would develop. And the cervix acts like a gatekeeper between the two. It's fascinating how it changes throughout the menstrual cycle in pregnancy.
And then we've got the fallopian tubes connecting everything to the ovaries.
Right. The fallopian tubes are like delicate highways transporting the egg from the ovary to the uterus. It's usually in these tubes that fertilization happens if a sperm meets the egg.
So we've got the players on the field, but what makes this system so mind-blowing is the menstrual cycle. It's not just bleeding. It's this whole hormonal symphony going on every month.
Yeah, it's a perfect example of how interconnected the body is. Think of it like a garden being prepped for a seed. The uterine lining thickens, getting ready to nourish a potential fertilized egg. This is all driven by the interplay of estrogen and progesterone.
Okay, those are two hormones I've definitely heard of, but I'm always a little fuzzy on what they actually do.
They're the stars of the show, and their levels rise and fall throughout the cycle. Estrogen builds things up, thickening that uterine lining, and also playing a role in bone health, which is important to remember as women get older.
So that's why estrogen is connected to osteoporosis later in life. If those levels drop, bones can become weaker.
Exactly. Now, progesterone comes into play after ovulation, helping to maintain that lining and getting it ready for implantation. If no fertilized egg arrives, progesterone levels drop, signaling the lining to shed, which is what we experience as a period.
Wow, so it's really this delicate dance between those two hormones each month. No wonder so many things can affect the cycle.
And it's not just the ovaries calling the shots. The brain gets involved too, specifically the hypothalamus and pituitary gland. They're like the conductors sending out hormonal signals to the ovaries.
So it's this whole communication network happening within the body. But how does this system go from essentially being dormant to fully active during puberty?
Puberty is like the grand opening of the reproductive system. The hypothalamus sends out a signal, telling the pituitary to release hormones that wake up the ovaries. That's when estrogen production really ramps up, leading to all those changes we associate with puberty.
So breasts develop, body hair appears, and periods start. It's a lot to handle for a young person,
Yeah,
both physically and emotionally.
absolutely. It's a huge transition and not always a smooth one. But what's interesting is that estrogen isn't just about those outward changes. It also has protective effect on the cardiovascular system.
Wait, so estrogen is good for our hearts too?
It is. It helps keep cholesterol in check, which is why women tend to have fewer heart problems before menopause,
Yeah.
when estrogen levels are naturally higher.
Okay, so now I'm seeing how this seemingly self-contained system is actually influencing our entire bodies. It's pretty amazing.
It truly is. But before we delve into what happens when this system starts to wind down, let's talk about what happens if a pregnancy occurs.
Okay, so sperm meets egg,
Yeah.
fertilization happens.
Yeah.
Then what?
That fertilized egg travels down the fallopian tube and implants itself in the uterine lining. And here's where it gets really wild. The placenta develops. It acts as this incredible lifeline, providing oxygen and nutrients to the developing fetus while also filtering out waste.
It's like building a whole new organ just for the pregnancy.
Right. And the placenta also produces hormones to support the pregnancy, further showcasing how this system can adapt and change.
So we've got the system that goes from dormant to active,
Mm-hmm.
can create life, and even impacts other parts of our health. It's pretty mind-blowing.
It is. But of course, things don't always go smoothly. There are a lot of potential bumps in the road when it comes to reproductive health.
And we definitely need to talk about those. But for this part of our deep dive, I want to leave you with this thought. What part of the system are you most curious about now? We'll be back to explore more, including menopause, common issues, and even the clitoris, which definitely deserves more attention. Welcome back to our deep dive into the female reproductive system. Before we jump into some of the things that can go wrong, I'm really curious about what happens as this system naturally starts to wind down.
Yeah, that's a great transition because we've been talking about how active and impactful this system is. But as women age, they enter menopause, which is marked by the ovaries gradually producing less estrogen and progesterone.
So it's not like a light switch that flips off. It's more of a slow dimmer.
Exactly. And that's why the transition can take years. And the experience is different for every woman. Some might barely notice any changes, while others experience a whole symphony of symptoms.
Like what kind of symptoms are we talking about? I know hot flashes are a big one.
Right? Hot flashes are very common, those sudden waves of intense heat. But it's not just feeling warm. You can also get night sweats, which disrupts sleep. And then there's vaginal dryness, which can make intercourse uncomfortable.
It sounds like menopause can really impact a woman's quality of life.
It definitely can. And what's interesting is that those mood swings we talked about earlier, those can actually worsen during menopause as hormone levels fluctuate.
So it's not just a physical change, it's emotional too.
Absolutely. And on top of the physical symptoms, there's often a sense of loss or grief. As a woman's reproductive years come to an end, it's a big life transition that can bring up all sorts of feelings.
I can see how that would be challenging. It's like closing a chapter in life.
Yeah.
But it also seems like there's this societal pressure to just grin and bear it, like menopause is something to be ashamed of.
There is, unfortunately. And that's why it's so important to talk openly about menopause, to normalize it, and to let women know they're not alone. There are ways to manage those symptoms and make the transition smoother.
Okay, so what can women do? I know hormone replacement therapy is an option, but it seems like there's debate about whether it's safe.
You're right, HRT can be effective for some women, but it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. It does carry some risks. So it's a decision to make in consultation with a healthcare provider, weighing the pros and cons.
So what about other options? Are there things women can do on their own to feel better?
Absolutely. Lifestyle changes can make a huge difference. Regular exercise, a healthy diet, and stress management techniques like yoga or meditation can really help. Even simple things like wearing breathable clothing and avoiding triggers like caffeine and spicy foods can reduce hot flashes.
It's empowering to know that women can take control of their health during this time.
Exactly. It's about understanding your body and what works for you. But let's not forget that while menopause is a natural part of aging, there are other issues that can affect the female reproductive system at any age.
You're right. Earlier, we talked about how hormones can get out of whack, leading to irregular periods or trouble conceiving. But what about other things that can go wrong?
Well, one of the most common issues is endometriosis. This is where tissue similar to the uterine lining grows outside the uterus, causing pain, irregular bleeding, and even infertility.
That sounds incredibly painful. What causes it?
We don't know the exact cause, but it seems to be linked to genetics and the immune system. Thankfully, there are treatments to manage the pain and improve fertility, though it can be a challenging condition to live with.
What about those benign growths you mentioned earlier, fibroids? Are those common?
They are quite common, especially in women in their 30s and 40s. Fibroids are non-cancerous growths in the uterus. Most women don't even know they have them. But in some cases, they can cause heavy bleeding pain and even pregnancy complications.
So it's important to get regular checkups and be aware of any changes in your body.
Exactly. And speaking of things we should be more aware of, let's talk about the clitoris. We briefly mentioned it earlier, but it deserves more attention.
I agree. It's a part of the body that's often shrouded in mystery.
Yeah.
And let's be honest, often completely ignored in conversations about reproductive health.
It is, and that's a shame because it plays a crucial role in female sexual pleasure. The clitoris is actually a complex structure with more nerve endings than any other part of the human body.
Wow. That's amazing. I think a lot of people, including women themselves, don't even realize that the clitoris isn't just that small external nub.
Exactly. It extends internally along both sides of the vagina, forming a wishbone shape. And it's incredibly sensitive to touch. Understanding its anatomy is key to understanding female pleasure.
You know, it's interesting how we often learn about the reproductive system in this very clinical, almost sterile way.
Mm-hmm.
But there's so much more to it than just the biological facts.
Absolutely. It's about pleasure, intimacy, and a woman's relationship with her own body. And that's something we need to talk about more openly and honestly.
I couldn't agree more. It's about time we break down the taboos and empower women to understand and embrace their bodies.
Exactly. And speaking of empowerment, one topic that often comes up in the conversations about the female reproductive system is fertility and the societal pressures surrounding motherhood.
It's a complex and sensitive topic for sure. We've talked about how this system is designed to create life.
Mhm.
But what happens when that's not the path someone chooses, or if they face infertility?
It can be incredibly challenging, both emotionally and socially. There's this societal expectation that all women should want to be mothers. And when that doesn't happen, whether by choice or circumstance, it can be isolating.
It's like there's this ticking biological clock that everyone talks about, adding to the pressure.
And that pressure can be immense, leading to feelings of inadequacy or even shame. It's crucial to remember that motherhood is a choice, not an obligation. And there are many paths to fulfillment and happiness, whether or not they include having children.
It's so important to validate those feelings and challenge the societal norms that make women feel like they're less than if they don't follow a certain path.
I agree. And it's also important to acknowledge the emotional roller coaster that comes with infertility. The desire to have a child can be incredibly strong.
Yeah.
And when it's met with roadblocks, can be heartbreaking.
It's definitely something that needs more awareness and support.
Absolutely. But even for women who do choose motherhood, there are still a lot of changes and challenges that come with pregnancy and postpartum. We've talked about the amazing things the body does to grow a human, but it also takes a toll.
Right? There's the physical recovery, the hormonal shifts, the sleep deprivation. It's a lot to handle.
Wow.
And it's important to acknowledge that it's not always sunshine and rainbows.
Exactly. And that's why postpartum support is so crucial, both physically and emotionally. This is a time when women need care and understanding, not judgment or pressure to bounce back immediately.
It's about recognizing that every woman's journey is unique, and there's no one right way to experience motherhood, menopause, or any stage of reproductive life.
Exactly. It's about respecting choices, providing support, and celebrating the diversity of experiences. But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to touch on one more aspect of reproductive health that's often overlooked.
Okay.
It's the idea that the female reproductive system is somehow inherently dirty or shameful. This is something that's been ingrained in many cultures for centuries.
Yeah.
And it can have a profound impact on how women view their bodies.
I know what you mean. There's this stigma surrounding menstruation, vaginal discharge, even the smell of the vulva. It's like we're taught to be ashamed of our natural bodily functions.
And that shame can be incredibly damaging. It can lead to women feeling embarrassed to talk about their health concerns, delaying seeking medical care, or even engaging in harmful practices like douching, which can actually disrupt the vagina's natural balance and lead to infections.
It's like we need a whole societal shift in how we view the female body and its natural process.
We do. We need to move away from this idea of shame and embrace the fact that these functions are normal, healthy, and even amazing.
I love that: normal, healthy, and amazing. That's a great mantra for anyone with a female reproductive system.
It is. And with that in mind, I want to leave our listeners with this question. What are some ways we can challenge those harmful societal norms and create a culture that celebrates and respects the female body? We'll be back to wrap up our deep dive with some final thoughts.
Welcome back to the deep dive. It's been quite a journey exploring the complexities of the female reproductive system. We've covered everything from puberty to menopause, and even touched on some sensitive topics like infertility and societal pressures.
And I think what's become clear is that this system is so much more than just about reproduction. It's intricately woven into a woman's overall health and well-being throughout her entire life.
You know, one thing that really struck me while reading through the Merck manual was the emphasis on understanding your own body. It wasn't just about knowing the anatomy. It was about recognizing what's normal for you and knowing when something might be off.
Absolutely. Every woman's experience is unique. And what's considered normal can vary widely. That's why it's so important to pay attention to your own cycle, your own flow, your own sensations.
It's like becoming a detective of your own body, right? Noticing those subtle changes, tracking patterns, and not being afraid to ask questions.
Exactly. And not dismissing those subtle signs. Sometimes what seems like a minor annoyance, like irregular periods or persistent bloating, could be a clue to an underlying hormonal imbalance or another issue.
It makes you realize how important it is to have a good relationship with your healthcare provider, someone you trust and can talk to openly about these things.
Absolutely. Finding a healthcare provider who listens to your concerns, explains things clearly, and empowers you to make informed decisions about your health is invaluable.
Thinking back to our conversation about puberty and even menopause, it really highlights the importance of education and open conversations. We often learn about this system in a very clinical, almost textbook way, but there's so much more to it than just the biological fact.
Here is. It's about understanding the emotional and social aspects as well. It's about body image, self-esteem relationships, and sexuality. It's about navigating those awkward conversations and figuring out who you are as a woman in the world.
It's like there's this whole hidden curriculum that we don't get taught in school, and it can leave so many young people feeling confused, shamed, or even scared of their own bodies.
That's why it's so important to create spaces for open and honest dialogue about these topics, whether it's with family, friends, or healthcare providers. Having those conversations can be incredibly empowering.
It could even change the way we approach sex education as a society. It shouldn't just be about the birds and the bees. It should be about body literacy, consent, pleasure, and respecting the diversity experiences.
I couldn't agree more. It's about fostering a sense of agency and self-love, helping young people feel confident and comfortable in their own skin.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the female reproductive system, what's the one key takeaway you want our listeners to remember?
I think it's this. Your body is your own. It's a source of power, pleasure, and creation. Take the time to get to know it, to understand its rhythms and nuances. Be your own advocate, ask questions, and never be ashamed to seek the support and information you need.
Beautifully said. And on that note, it's been a privilege to explore this fascinating and complex topic with you all. We hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity, empowered you with knowledge, and inspired you to embrace your own unique journey as a woman.
Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive. We'll see you